Now it's time for today's perspective, and it is about rights, it is about equality, and it is about empowerment. That is the theme for this weekend's upcoming International Women's Day, the day encouraging women to shout out the message that women's rights are human rights and to celebrate women in all their diversities. Where, though, where does this leave men? What are men's roles, if you like, on International Women's Day? Well, joining us now is Daniel Guinness. He's co-founder and managing director of Beyond Equality, an organisation that aims to engage men into rethinking what being a man means. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. I had a look at your website. I enjoyed a phrase on there: boys won't be boys, they'll be what we teach them to be. What do you mean by that?
Thank you very much for having me this morning. This really is at the core of it, right? Which is this possibility and this reality that we're actually shaping the young people in our lives and in our world. And so much of what we see at the moment, whether it's worries about harassment or boys' behaviours online or boys' attendance at school, so many of these things get caught in this perspective of like, that's just the way it is. It's the way it has to be. That's how boys are. But what we've realised and what the evidence shows us is actually with the right education, the right perspectives, the right support and guidance, we can really create young men and therefore older men who find a much better place for themselves in our society.
So does that mean, do you think then, that something is, if you like, for want of a better phrase, going wrong with men, or with some men anyway?
I think it's like we shift the focus a little bit off going wrong with men, and it's like going wrong in their socialization, in the sort of situation we've set up for them, and the way that that's impacting upon them and shaping some of their behaviors. But yeah, absolutely, we see problems. I mean, we are looking up towards International Women's Day this weekend, so I think some of the focus has to be on the issues that men are causing for women. But at the same time, there's also issues around mental health and suicide, around boys actually getting into education, staying education, getting jobs. These things are major issues that are facing many countries around the world.
And I know that one of your campaigns is called the See What She Sees campaign. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a really simple idea, but so important. The realization is that women experience things quite differently to men in certain situations. So if we think about public transport or moving about the streets, or maybe how people are treated in nightlife, women will have a different set of concerns to what men have. And the reality that I know is that often men and boys are quite oblivious to those things. We don't realize that actually the person a couple of meters to our right, who's a woman, might be having different set of worries, might be worried about her safety, might be worried about what comments she might be receiving, might have experiences that actually shape those. And what we want to do here is just say to men, listen, if we have a look at some of these situations and we start to understand what women are experiencing in those, we're going to be in a much better position to actually act and stop whatever's going on there. And we did a survey that coincided with this campaign. And the survey showed that 9 in 10 women want men to do more actions, to take responsibility for their safety. 95% of men want to have equal share of that responsibility for women's safety. And at the same time, you have 3 out of 5 men think that some of those claims are exaggerated. And so we can see here there's this really strong intent and desire from all people that men are involved in solving these issues, but there's this knowledge and awareness gap that sits there for men.
Presumably the worst problems that you come across are those of sexual violence.
Yeah, I think sexual violence and domestic violence they're the most violent forms of problems that we come across. Yeah, absolutely.
And how difficult is it to try and deal with those?
Well, as an organisation, we're really focused on the primary prevention stage of things. So we realise that an incident of harassment or sexual assault doesn't just occur. It's built upon various ideas that we have either like within an individual or that you'd have within a society that normalise those sorts of violence, that say, well, it's okay for someone to be making comments on the street about someone's appearance. It's okay for those sorts of jokes. It's okay for someone to for a man to touch a woman at a bar if he's being flirtatious, even if he doesn't know her. So those sorts of attitudes where they do get ingrained, they can mean that you have a situation where people are far more likely to actually step past the next line and commit an act of violence. And also, when they do that, it's far more likely that their actions are excused or their actions are seen as being minimal. And so women don't get justice in those situations. And so for us, what we need to do is go back and actually address those cultural issues, address the sort of attitudes that men have, and do that work so that men can actually understand how they have the skills to build healthy relationships and actually start playing their roles in creating like a safer and more equitable world for women, as well as addressing their own concerns and mental health.
We talked about the See What She Sees campaign. I know you have a series of other ones that you have. One that intrigued me was specifically helping sportsmen to understand what masculinity could or should be for them.
Yeah, and this is a great space because we know that for a lot of men, sports is one of the places they really feel belonging. And it's also one of the places that's like most heavily associated with certain ideas and stereotypes about being a man. I mean, I know personally, I grew up and I really thought the only way of being a man was being an athlete. And the reality is that can be really positive for men. You know, they can learn, and for people of any gender for that matter, but people can learn discipline, they can learn teamwork, they can learn how to use their body, how to be healthy, all sorts of pleasures and joys, all sorts of satisfaction and achievements can come from that. But what we look at is some of the darker sides of what's going on in those environments, you know, where it can turn into a pressure cooker where someone might be dealing with issues, but they feel that they have to solve them all by themselves, that they have this burden upon them, that they can't show any weakness to anybody. And what that means is, one, they're not actually solving their problems because they're not seeking help. And two, that it starts actually to build up. And what might have been some stress or some initial concern or maybe a problem they're dealing with at home quickly becomes for a young man something that's playing day to day on their mental well-being and on their ability to perform as an athlete. So what we're finding is that with some of these younger athletes and also older athletes in these very high-level professional clubs, they're getting huge benefits from getting a space where they can actually recognise that they're a person as well. You know, they need to work on their inside, they need to work on their ability to process the stress they're going through, their emotions, to communicate with other people, and really also to recognise that they're going to have a part to play in our society where they may well have a lot of attention on them, they may well have a lot of power or soft power, and they need to know how to use that wisely and safely for them and safely for other people.
Thanks very much for being with us on the programme, Daniel. Daniel Guinness, co-founder and managing director of Beyond Equality, joining us there. We'll let him go off and feed or at least pet his dog. You could just about hear the dog in the background, couldn't you, Daniel? Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. A lot more coverage, of course, to come of International Women's Day over the next few days here on France 24.